Hello, everyone. We have just screened a very powerful film, Stonewall with a T. Some of you have seen it just now. Some of you have already seen it before, either during the film festival or in the last couple of hours. And if you didn't get a chance to see it yet and you're tuning in into this Q&A, you still have a chance to do so for another 14 hours, 12 hours or something that you can still watch the film in. Stonewall with a T is a very interesting film because not only it does the historic overview of the transgender and LGBTQ movement and how the two are interrelated, but not quite, sometimes at odds, sometimes helping each other and so on. But also it brings us all the way to today and what is really going on today. I was very fascinated with the way Samy Nemir Olivares, the director who is here with us, has used all the documentary footage. So maybe, okay, well, let me introduce you both. Samy Nemir Olivares is the director of Stonewall with a T, and Natalie Gologorsky is a team member who had also been working on this film, not to prepare it, but from the Q&A point of view, when we first programmed it in the festival's 7th edition back in June when we went online. So my question to Samy is, it must have been quite difficult to assemble so much footage together and make it a coherent statement about the background, the history, and bringing us to the present. Can you say a little bit about your process, how you got about this?
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. Yes, as you say, it's extremely hard because I'm not a filmmaker. I was a journalist, so I know how to take video, but I think the documentaries, as any documentary, like professional one, knows that it takes so much technical music and like the video, etc. I have over 1 terabyte or 2 terabytes of footage of the transgender community. Basically, most of the archival footage of the transgender community, because a journalist called Randy Wicker, who it's showcased in the documentary, who was friend of Marsha P. Johnson and Silvia Rivera, who also gave them home and a job, and he followed them for many years, and many of the interviews that he does to Silvia Rivera are there. So he passed me many of that footage, but also that's the archival footage. And then the modern part, also I did some archival footage research at a library at the LGBTQ Center, and then the modern one is more like the footage that I filmed, and everything is so powerful that it's so hard. So I'm still working on it, and like I film other scenes of the update of them achieving their civil rights in 2019, where they go to the state legislature when the law passed, and then when they go and march to Washington. And I have not been able to add that, but I think that chronologically it was the more sense. So I tried to add a little bit of sneak peek of what happened, because I wanted to show the progress, although slow, but some progress, and the evolution of the movement, and how I wanted to make a very bold statement of the transgender people have been here for decades, 6 decades, marching, protesting. The fact that the media didn't pay attention, the fact that the LGBTQ community, the gay organizations didn't embrace them, is different. But they were always there, they did their events, and they were just marginalized and silent. So I wanted to just show very clear, year by year, from Stonewall, that they have been there. And I felt that the chronological part, and I self-taught myself, I studied at the New School, so I had access to the cameras and I have some editing, but I want to also to make a statement with this documentary of not doing the traditional storytelling. I literally wanted to break the storytelling arc of because most transgender, and very important, most transgender documentaries have been about following a character and telling their story and telling how they transition or their childhood. And that serves a very important purpose of like awareness and education and like empathizing with a character. But this documentary is not about one character, about their transition. It's nothing about their personal sort of struggle. It was more about the collective, about how they have come together for 2 decades to march together. So I wanted to be very clear, and I don't hone in too much in any of them, just to show the collective struggle, because there's so many other documentaries about individual transgender women, but no one has the footage that I had of this protest, particularly the Trans Day of Action. So I wanted to show this collective effort of the transgender community.
Yeah, and it was very powerful in that sense, because it gave a overview which a lot of people don't know. And it's very important for them to know the background, the history, because the more people know, the less they would become prejudiced. I hope, they will learn something and become less prejudiced. However, even though you didn't pick one character and follow them, some of your characters came across such vividly and so powerfully that we really want to get to know them more. So, and they tell you the best way is to less is more, or whatever they say, less is more. So this is one of those cases as to you're giving us a glimpse of who they are and what they stood for and what they were fighting for. But at the same time, you're not just following the character's story, but the movement. Maybe the sequel would be picking 1 or 2 or 3 of the characters, because they're all fascinating people. So Natalie, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. I was actually just thinking, going right off of what Nora said, I was really interested in the way you seem to use the archival footage of, I think, Sylvia Rivera, if I'm right, who was speaking, to sort of like frame some of the modern day events that were happening. So I was interested how you made that decision.
You mean the black and white footage of her at the beginning?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, Sylvia Rivera is a very undervalued and understated icon of the transgender community. All my research, led that Sylvia Rivera was kind of the pioneer. And there's another documentary, which is called The Death of Marsha P. Johnson by David France. And his intention at the it's Netflix. It's a big documentary. He had a lot of money. And at the beginning, his proposal was Sylvia and Marsha. And I think in the process, he has kind of a similar footage that I have, of course, where he had over $100,000 and an entire team of 20 people. I think in the process, they decided to narrow down on the death of Marsha P. Johnson and the tragedy and the violence against transgender women, because there's so much, right? And like when you traditional for a character. So in that documentary, unfortunately, Sylvia gets like in the shadow. It's kind of like, as a extra of the life of Marsha, but in real life, Sylvia was kind of the protagonist, just to speak. And Marsha used to say, I'm the vice president, Marsha was following Sylvia. So no one to this day had made justice to the larger than life biography of Sylvia. So I want to make sure to just show, her impact, her speeches. And I wanted to make a connection between Sylvia and people like Cecilia Gentili in the modern time, which is a transgender immigrant, a refugee, and how their struggles, they're still, talking about the same issues, they're using the same language, and how largely they have been influenced by the legacy of Sylvia Rivera. And they draw so much inspiration. So I wanted to show that what Sylvia started in 1969 is still happening in 2014, because the LGBTQ community and society at large were not paying attention. So to respond to Nora's reflection at the beginning, I just want to say that this archival footage and documentary came, and I said it in the other Meet the Filmmakers, it stemmed from my research for my thesis degree, where I started with a question: why is that transgender people do not have civil rights in New York? And I thought that it was Republicans, I thought that it was religious groups, I thought that it was like conservative groups. And then the more that I explored, that I started interviewing every activist, I realized that their anger and their frustration was with their gay and lesbian counterparts, who back then were still afraid of adding the transgender into their mix and be too outspoken about them to avoid, feel discriminated, and so they can get the civil rights passed faster. And then the civil rights bill, SONDA, for gay people passed in 2002 in the city council, and then in 2005 in the state legislature without transgender. And while I don't know if in this version the founder, the director of the organization is there, but they did not. At that time they didn't do the advocacy that they should.
Well, at the beginning, it might be a bit understandable because they're trying to get one thing past the door, but then once you get past the door, you should stretch your hand and bring the rest of them in with you. But I'm understanding that did not happen. So,
well, that's going. Yeah, that's it's not in the film, but in the written piece of my thesis is what is called incrementalism in the legal, so in the theory. And an incrementalist, the LGBTQ actually rights have been successful in an incrementalist way. Marriage equality starting in Hawaii, and then Minnesota, Massachusetts, and has been always little by little, passing little ordinances in local places. So that's what the idea of the gay group was let's pass our bill and then we're gonna help you. But the transgender community warned them, there's not gonna pass in many years. And then they were right, because then they moved to the marriage equality, and then they were left in the cold for 19 years. So it was very unfortunate. And I think that if they would have added, it's revisionist history too, we cannot, but the idea was that time there were no transgender women, there was no people of color in the boards of these gay groups. So their identities, their voices were not as respected. So it's very interesting. And I think my statement with the documentary is that moving forward, when we're talking about social justice, we cannot advocate for justice or inclusion by leaving others behind, the most vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Right? So
Absolutely.
we are now advocating for a cause, a social justice movement. We need to make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind, because the trans community could have been included, and the gay people could have said, no, we're not going to have our bill rights, civil rights, until you add transgender people. We're gonna wait as long as possible. It was a moral decision. And I, in the documentary, didn't want to take any side. I just wanted to present both sides to some extent, and I think it's a great history lesson. And I want to say that any of this chapter is documented anywhere. This is my research from my master's degree, and some people know it, but it has not been in articles. It's not there. I put all together all these pieces and created this narrative, but it's a chapter of LGBTQ history that has not been studied yet. So I wanted to kind of unearth that.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we thought that would be very important and appropriate to include this film in the SR for Black Voices, because when you're talking about race and gender discrimination and so on, you can't fight for some and not others. There is no such thing as justice for some but not others. If you're fighting for racial justice, then it has to include all equality, all races. If you're talking about gender equality, then everybody has to be included, whether it's gender choice, whether it's gender, biological gender, or whatever it is. You cannot say, oh, okay, this is for this people, but that doesn't cover those people. It's not inclusion, it's exclusion. So, and of course that's wrong, but
the majority of the subjects, the activists in the documentary are Black transgender women, not because I chose them, but it's just because they were the majority of the activists in the streets organizing the protests, the ones that I were like advocating, lobbying in Albany with legislators. So because they had a more at stake, they have suffered so much through their lives that they were the vast majority. And Melissa Sklarz was one of the very few white transgender women, and they respect her a lot because she had done a lot. But the rest was completely transgender, Black transgender women or men leading this fight in the streets. And it was not until Caitlyn Jenner that then all the media started paying attention in New York and everywhere else. But many of them in the documentary now are famous or have some sort of like well known in their fields, but they were like back in the documentary, no one cared about them. They were like working on as a community organizers, unemployed, and it was a completely different time. And
you know, it's very important that you're bringing up Jenner, and also Laverne Cox is in the film, and she's one of the people who's speaking out. I mean, because with these characters, with these people becoming celebrities or being out there in front of everybody on the social media, suddenly a real face, something that people can relate with or to, is put in front of people, and they realize that, wait a minute, oh, so this is what transgender is. And then otherwise the lack of knowledge and the ignorance are the worst thing for prejudice and discrimination. So Natalie, you were going to say
that's the importance of visibility. Okay.
I was just wondering if we could talk about some of the footage again that you found. So you said earlier that besides the black and white footage of Sylvia Rivera, that you had found some other footage of the Trans Day of Action that had never been shown before. So I guess I was wondering how you found that and how you decided how to cut it in the film, because that was really interesting the way you did that.
Yeah, many of those archival footage are from the archives of Randy Weaker, who is a self-journalist, and he worked as a journalist many years. That's the man that he's a gay journalist, very controversial, very famous at some point. There's an entire documentary about him on Vimeo or YouTube. Randy Weaker is a character of the gay community. And in my research and interviews throughout the documentary, he passed to me some of that footage. So David France has some of that footage, but he didn't use it for the death of Marsha P. Johnson. And he said that this is not planning to do a documentary on Sylvia. So I chose to elevate some of that footage, as well as there are other footage about Trans Day of Action at the LGBTQ Center archives.
Yeah, it's very important to make all this public and make it known and accessible. And that's why we decided to make this film, this event free of charge. And I want to take this opportunity and thank you again for agreeing for us to show the film yet again. And I have a number of people who have been watching. They're not following the Q&A, but don't worry, because some people are maybe watching it just now, or maybe they already watched it or are watching later. But the Q&A, as soon as we are done, is going to be already it's streaming on our Facebook page, and it will be on the YouTube channel. So people who will watch it later will be able to get back. They won't be able to ask you direct questions, but they might still put comments in the comment section. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, Natalie, you wanted to ask another question?
Oh, I mean, I didn't have one already, but I just wanted to comment that you clearly have the fact that you had this background as like a researcher in the archives for LGBT history, I think really brought something to your documentary. You know, you could tell that you did your homework, and it's really nice to have somebody who's got the knowledge, you know, make a film about it.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. But also, besides all this, you're politically active, Samy. Maybe you can tell us something about that and how you are
Well,
contributing.
yeah, in a long story short, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, openly gay, so I was bullied, and I escaped basically to New York looking, waiting for a very heaven for LGBTQ people. And what I just found was the stories of transgender women, particularly Black transgender women that are in the documentary. Those were my 2 years in New York. And I see New York from the lens of inequality and injustice, particularly for LGBTQ people, people of color. And it's not the picture that you learn about New York. I mean, many of these transgender women in the interviews that I did were like coming to events and they didn't have a Metro card to go to their meetings, you know, and they were unemployed and doing sex work and engaging in sex work. And, you know, I was very moved. And I think it was a process that radicalized me in the sense of seeing how, you know, it is so unjust that in a city like New York, so rich, so welcoming, transgender women are still, you know, and LGBTQ people discriminated. So after that, I stayed involved in LGBTQ activism, and I then now run for district leader in Brooklyn, and my city is called male district leader, and there's also a female district leader, so it's a gender binary. And I was very moved by the fact that there's a gender binary, and it excludes gender non-binary people, transgender people. And I made my mission now to advocate to repeal that law from the Democratic Party so people can run regardless of their gender, and that's something that I'm working right now.
Yeah. Well, we wish you all the best. This was really a great opportunity for us to enlighten ourselves, enlighten our audiences about the LGBTQ movement, but specifically with the focus on the transgender movement, and have a historic overview, but also get to know some of the characters. We also had the pleasure of welcoming Tanya Walker, who is in the film, the other day during our talk show. And hopefully we will have other opportunities and work with her or bring her on, because she's such a powerful personality and she's fighting for the cause. And hopefully all this effort and energy of advocacy will have its results very soon.
Thank you for the opportunity and for choosing this documentary. And when you were talking about visibility of people seeing someone, a character, that's something that, you know, showing these documentaries, TV and characters has so much importance for the education of the transgender community. So it's super important.
Yeah. Thank you again. Thank you, Natalie. It's really great to see you. So let me pass one more time the festival address, like the website. So if people want to, you can still see the film. It's not on the ticketing anymore, but if you email us, we will make sure that you get the link, maybe for just one more day. Is that okay, Samy? Can we do that?
Yeah.
Because it's such an important film, and I'm sure people, when they listen to this talk, they will want to see it even more. Okay, thank you so much. This is the Socially Relevant Film Festival New York, and this is a special program we have put together, a retrospective of films from our previous editions under the title SR for Black Voices. Okay, thank you all.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.